Hi, everybody out there in Radio Land. We are coming to you live with a special interview. Brad Jersak, the author of A More Christlike God. And I should tell you up front that we're having some difficulties with our audio, with our video. Uh, Most of the things that are possible to have difficulties with, we're having difficulties. We hope you're able to pick us up. And we're doing everything we can to present this interview with Brad in a way that you can at least hear the audio. So, Brad, welcome, and thank you so much for writing this book, A More Christ-like God. And maybe we can turn it over to you real quickly. First of all, I should give another disclaimer, and that is that I'm the president of Plain Truth Ministries, and as a disclaimer or as a disclosure, we do have an interest in your book. Beyond, this is not just any author. This is a book that we have a considerable interest in, most of all because of its Christ-like, grace-based teaching. But beyond that, we published the book, and of course, we have some financial interest in it, so I should disclose that. But let's talk a little, Brad, about how A More Christ-like God came about. That's question one. And how would you describe briefly how the book came about?
Well, I suppose it's been a labor of love for a few years. I've been studying about the need for a God who's just like Jesus. And I've had many Christians come and say, if God is a God who is like the one I heard about growing up, the one I need to be terrorized by, or the kind of false images they carry and distortions they carry about God, then it's really difficult for them to keep their faith. And I say, well, you know what? God isn't like those things. God isn't like your rapture theology. God isn't like the tyrant king. God isn't. He's like Jesus. And then we found people who are unchurched saying virtually the same thing. It's like I'd never embrace faith. Because God is like this, God is like that. He's not like that at all. The God you've been rejecting is an idol, and God approves of your rejection of that. But what if he was like Jesus? Then what would you think? And they said, if God was like Jesus, well, that would be cool. I could follow your rejection. So, Greg, did you get any of that? I see the audio is cutting out at my end.
Everything you said. I hope that our listeners are hearing the next question or the next bit of at a disadvantage because I didn't hear everything you said, but I caught enough of the flavor. Let's talk more about today are people of faith. We are we have a sensitivity to the distortions and perversions of God in religions at large, world within the world of Christianity as we know it, or Christendom. So let's talk a little bit about the distortions and perversion
Greg, I did lose you completely there, but if you're able to hear me, yeah, I'll address some of the distortions and perversions that are like veils. First of all, there's those that make God very punitive, and these can arise from either teaching.
Our monitor really breaking it. Go ahead.
Yeah. We have the harsh pictures of God, the punishing judge, the angry king, the tyrant who's watching your every move and waiting to strike you with lightning. We call him God, the mighty smiter. And then we have another, almost the opposite of that, is God the doting grandfather. And God the doting grandfather does whatever you want. And that would be really great news, except that it's very disappointing when he doesn't. And we have versions of that, like God, the genie in the lantern, that you have to rub the bottle of intercession just right to have God come and fulfill your three wishes. And a little uglier version of the same thing is God's sugar in the sky, where we have a relationship with God, but we don't really love him. We just want our inheritance, so-called. And so we're, in that sense, gold diggers in our relationship with God. Another version of this would be the deadbeat dad, where he's absent, he's silent, he's far away, and he wasn't there when I needed them the most. And these are all really horrendous distortions of the nature of God, that if we worship that God, well, first of all, we're not worshiping a very Christ-like God at all, but second, they affect how we live. And so in this book, I'm trying to say, you may recognize some of these distortions and false images. You may recognize the effects they've had in your life, and a way to get healing, a way to restore your faith, a way to love God again is to look at Jesus, the Jesus of the Gospels, and to say, Jesus is the image of the invisible God. He's the exact representation of his likeness. He's the fullness of God dwelled in Jesus in bodily form. And that Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And so when I begin to look at God as completely Christ-like, I fall in love with him again. I want to follow him. I want to know him. I want to know him better. I want him to know me and love me. I want to receive that love. So did you pick up any of that?
Going, and I noticed on our screen that our viewers are still with us, many of them. They haven't dropped off, so perhaps the difficulties that we're having let's take another turn. And gospel centered. You have throughout the book a running feature wherein you present terms, theological terms, which people may not be. There's a little end of the book that further defines them or reiterates them. So I want to talk about at least three form, and I'm hoping you're picking up enough of my my questions, so I'll mention cruciform one more time. And by the way, if you review, which were the word cruciform.
Okay. Yeah. what I'm just checking to see if folks on Facebook can hear us at all, and maybe they can respond if they're catching anything, or because I picked up about 10% of what you said, but I know you want me to talk about cruciform. So yes. In this sense, cruciform literally means in the form of a cross or cross shape. And in the book, what I'm saying is that our clearest image of God is not only Jesus, but the revelation of Jesus on the cross, what he's showing us about God there. And what he shows us is three primary attributes of God through his crucifixion. One is that he's self-giving and always has been. So he doesn't just lay down his life on the cross, he laid down his life becoming and becoming our incarnate. He also was cruciform or self-giving in the sense of creation, where he makes space for a universe to exist. And although he filled that universe with his love, he also made space for it to function. And so that's a real act of self-giving, or self-donation, as the ancient theologians would say. And then even in the unity of the Trinity, where Father, Son, and Holy Spirit relate to each other in love, it's all about self-giving. There's another Greek word for that, perichoresis, and that's sort of like the idea of a dance, where you simultaneously enfold the other and then make space for the other. So you're always moving towards, but you're also making space for, and this is love. So God was self-giving in the Trinity, then he's self-giving in creation, then he's self-giving in the incarnation, and then we really see it in a powerful, decisive way on the cross. The second phrase that I use for this is radically forgiving. So on the cross, we see the radical forgiveness of God. Even when we crucified him, he forgives us. He loves us. And we hear Jesus saying, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And this isn't something new to God. It may be new to us, though. And so then we see that in the very nature of God, he's radically forgiving. And we can look back and see that this is how he has been, even in the Old Testament. Sometimes people dismiss what they call the Old Testament. And I say, well, no, it's Jesus or the Christlike God of the Old Testament. My favorite text there is Psalm 103, where already then, 1,000 years before Christ, we're hearing that the Lord is gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness. His mercy is higher than the heavens are from the earth, and he's removed our sins from us as far as the east is from the west. So this radical forgiveness is playing out in the Old Testament, climaxes again in Hosea, where we just see him freely forgiving unrepentant people and demonstrating that it's his kindness that can actually lead them to repent. So the forgiveness precedes their sinning, precedes their repentance. And then Jesus comes and he shows us this in his life, but he shows it quintessentially in his death. So we've got him self-giving, radically forgiving, and then one other thing would be co-suffering. Hebrews tells us that God has chosen not to watch our situation from afar, but he's the God who came down. And he assumed the dilemma of the human kind of what do we call this? The human condition. He embraces all that we experience, even death itself, in order to overcome it and to heal us. And so when we say God is cruciform, what we mean is that the cross is not a little holiday from him being the Almighty. What we're seeing is the very nature of what it is to be Almighty. Almighty love. Almighty, self-giving, radically forgiving, co-suffering love. And that's what I mean by the cruciform God.
And I believe we heard you terminate that explanation and that response. Thank you. You went a little bit more into the self-giving, the forgiving, which really led into you have adequately covered. Continuing for our listeners right now with what I'm saying. So, but I want to pick up on something you said there as you went to Psalm, and you you were modeling for us there a way to as our estimate from a Christ-centered perspective. I don't know if you can take some time to comment on that a little bit more, Brad.
Just repeat the question in one sentence if you can. I missed a lot of that. I think you said something about reading the Old Testament with Christ-like lens.
Is he done?
I'm not hearing Greg. What was the question? It was to do with the Old Testament, I think. Well, I can still hear myself. So I think we might have to. Go ahead.
In conclusion, and then pondering the technical difficulty that we want to plumb, and we have been plumbing, and I've seen. Hey, look at all the technical difficulties they're having. Come take a look. But in any case, I'm glad for additional viewers that have joined us all the time. Thanks for hanging in there with us. Let's talk, Brad, about God, or of God, and to play, and you do such in my view, a tremendous job of explaining another question about God, and as it's called, God's wrath. So can we speak for a moment or two about God's wrath?
Okay, hopefully you can hear me now. When I talk about God's wrath, in the Bible, there are texts where it seems like it's a very literalistic wrath, where God is angry, he's burning with something that looks like the human emotions of rage, that he can be quite volatile. In a moment, he can strike and open up the ground and swallow 29,000 people, or he can strike down thousands and thousands at once, 185,000 soldiers of Assyria. And there's this kind of anger about him. But as we proceed through the Bible, God seems to progressively unveil the true nature of his wrath as a metaphor, and that we realize that we have an anthropomorphism going on here. That is, humans describing someone more than human, with human language and human emotions, when in fact they know that this God is far bigger than that. God is bigger than human emotional outbursts and violent rage and so on. But they do use the term wrath then to say, well, this was our experience when we were defying him. So when we sin and something bad happens, and he warns us not to sin, and something bad happens, it's the self-destructive properties of sin. But because God warned us not to do it, we take it as if he was the one striking out and destroying. Well, when you come through the Bible, you see this unveiling happening to the point where already in Psalms, Ezekiel, and Isaiah, you actually see that God is giving you over. That's what wrath means. He's saying, choose defiance and sin. I will allow you to defy me. I consent to your capacity to resist me. I'm not going to force obedience on you. But if you sin, you're going to find out that sin has devastating effects. And so then he describes this as wrath. We've got a couple examples of that. Let's say David's calling for the wrath of God in the Psalms, and he says, I want you to destroy my enemies. And then he tells God, and he tells us what that would look like. My enemies dig, and then they fall in the pit. And that's wrath. It's the self-destructive properties of sin itself, intrinsic judgment that happens when we defy God. And it's not that God is mad and he's punishing us, but it's that sin hurts us. Well, we finally get to Romans, and Paul's very explicit about this. In Romans chapter 1, he says 3 times that this wrath is giving over. You went your own way, and God let you. And when he let you, bad things happen. 3 times he says this, and then you get to Romans 5, and what you read is that God sent Jesus to save us from the wrath. He's not saving us from God, but he's saving us from the consequences of our own sins, which is the wrath. And so the progressive illumination that we get throughout the scriptures, it moves from wrath as the anger and rage of God, or even sending violent angels to harm us, to rather him giving us over to our own stubborn pride and allowing sin itself to punish us, but also providing a way providing us from the wrath. So in that way, I see wrath as consent. He also offers a divine solution. Back to you, Greg.
Perfect. Thank you, Brad. And we did get much of that. I'm really hoping, as we've gone through this live event, that the technical difficulties are almost entirely on our end. And what a wonderful thing that would be, because again, we're at an all-time a broadcast high of viewers right now, as I see on my screen. So people out there must be, again, either enduring it or picking up most of it. So thank you. Let's go to this one concept as we begin to wrap things up here. A powerful and important concept. I'll just introduce it by saying this, that you speak in the book about how we call God from Paul in the book of Romans, Abba, and how that God is like Jesus. And in fact, this is what Jesus told us. He came to reveal the Father. And what we find is that God is like Jesus, exactly like Jesus. And it seems to me that this one element alone, if we were to follow it through logically, sequentially, and in our heart, it would help to clarify many of the misconceptions of God. Going slowly, hopefully that at least on your end, you're picking up the question. So could you speak a little bit more about the idea, the truth, that God is like Jesus?
Yes, I picked up almost everything you said there. So I want to address that. There is this sense that some people have that as if Jesus were one aspect of God. So, Jesus is the nice guy who shows up in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But God has these other facets that are more violent and volatile. And the New Testament gets really clear on this. It says, no, wait a minute. There are no other facets to God. The three persons of the Trinity are all revealed perfectly in Jesus. So Hebrews 1 says that Jesus is the radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of his likeness. And it uses the word exact there. Now, we're not saying that God is only a male Jew from the first century, but we are saying that you see the essence of the nature of God in Jesus Christ. One theologian said God is Christ-like, and in him is no un-Christ-likeness at all. He's referring to 1 John there, where we read that God is love and that he's shown us this love in Jesus. But 1 John also says that God is light and in him is no darkness at all. And then it says, and Jesus himself is the light of the world. And so you don't get other aspects of God that aren't 100% Christ-like. Everything that we say about God needs to be something Jesus or the Abba he revealed in person could have done. So when we see other revelations in Scripture of God that don't align with the Christ-like one, we need to look at why this might be. What veil were the readers or the writers having over their eyes as they're seeing this God, describing this God? Because it's only in Jesus that we get perfect theology. Everything up to then was immature theology. There's a sense in which God's progressively revealing himself, but he's also doing that through people who don't quite get him. So in John 1, we read, no one's actually seen God except for Jesus, God the only Son, who is in the bosom of the Father. He came to make him known. And that every other revelation needs to bow to the living God when he came in person. I'll just give a PS to that. Some people would also like to say, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he comes the first time as a lamb. But the next time he comes, he's coming back and he's angry and he's got a sword and he's going to massacre millions of people because he's coming back as a lion. Well, we don't interpret Jesus as part Gospels and part Revelation. The Jesus of the incarnation in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is the incarnation of the living God in his fullness. Revelation, on the other hand, is a vision that's very difficult to understand, but even there, John says, I went to look to see the lion, and what do you know? I saw a lamb. So you need to interpret the whole book of Revelation through the four Gospels and through this revelation of God as the one who's victorious like a lion, but he does it as the lamb slain. And so even there, it's pointing back to the cruciform God revealed in Jesus, that when we see Jesus, we see the Father. In fact, 1 John says we actually beheld the glory of God. We touched him, we heard him, we fellowshipped with him. And so any un-Christ-like image of God is not God at all.
We have been talking with Brad Jersak. We hope successfully for all of you who have been joining us. Thank you for enduring any technical difficulties that you may have experienced on your end. We certainly have experienced plenty here. And for taking the time to discuss his new book, A More Christlike God, A More Beautiful Gospel, just published a few months ago at CWR Press, Christianity Without the Religion Press, available in many places. You may purchase a copy at www. about the insights that God has given and used Dr. Jersak to give to us, and we think it is for this and technically that we've encountered. And with that, we'll say thank you and good day.